Hey, what's going on? Welcome to my channel. My name is Albert, and in this video, I want to talk about why the funeral home industry is about to be disrupted. And I know it's a super random topic, but someone messaged me on YouTube, was like, "Hey, you should make a video about this." And I thought, "Hey, why not? I'll try anything." I actually happen to know a lot about the funeral space, which is super random, but yeah, I'll get into it. And I'll just give you all the facts and information you need to know about funeral homes so you know how it works and everything. Why do I know so much about funeral homes? I actually have a company where we sell software to funeral homes. So I've spoken to probably over 2,000 funeral homes in the last, I don't know how many years. So I know a good amount about it. So yeah, let's get into it. I have a table of contents here. I'll kind of cover what funeral homes do. I'll cover why I think funeral homes are very inefficient. I'll give you some random facts about funeral homes as well. Not sure why I put that in the middle, but hey, that's why it's random. I'll kind of generalize the type of people funeral directors are, just to have a sense of like what kind of people they are. And then I'll cover changes that are happening in the industry that I think is leading to the reason why things are going to change pretty drastically for funeral homes. And then I'll cover a little bit about what my company does as well. So what do funeral homes do? If you think about it, they really are like a wedding planner, but for dead people, right? Or someone that died. And they really have to do a lot. So imagine like your wedding organizer, what they do, they kind of like make sure everything's like set up, make sure everyone's, doing what they're supposed to do. And that's clearly kind of what the funeral home does. One of the biggest things the funeral home does in my mind is they have to pick up the body. So like someone can pass away like 2 a.m. and they call the funeral home. The funeral home has to be ready to pick them up, which is a pretty physically brutal job if you ask me, because like sometimes people weigh like 400 pounds. They have to bring like 2 people out there or 3 people out there and carry them. So yeah, that's a big part of the job, I think, that where you have to be available at all times. Another thing that they do is obviously embalming. If you don't know what that is basically take this like tool, they stick it in your body, and then they like flush out the blood and they replace it with embalming fluid. And what that does is that makes your body less likely to rot. So if you're gonna have a service later on, you look fine for the next like I don't know how many days it's good for, but you don't look as bad for those few days. And then obviously if you're getting cremated, then they bring you to the crematory, they cremate you. A big part of the job is really getting all of the information for death certificates. So there's a series of information they need to get. It's called vital statistics information. It's like your mom's name, where you were born, your social security number, your level of education, your ethnicity or nationality, or not, yeah, your ethnicity, just a bunch of random stuff. So there's a lot of information collection. Did they get all the paperwork signed? Because obviously they have to get approval for everything. So like, hey, can you cremate this, or can you do that? Can we remove the body, etc. They get all this paperwork signed. They obviously schedule everything. So like, if you're doing something at the cemetery, you have to plan that. If they do something at the, at some other place, to plan that. And a lot of times you do at the funeral home, so they have to like organize everything for you. And then obviously you see that all the paperwork, the payment, and all the insurance. So they do a lot of like paper pushing, right? Getting information here, putting it over there, making sure everything's set up. So there's a lot of organizing. And then there's also the physical part of it as well. So some random facts about funeral homes. The funeral homes are actually super regulated. So they have all these rules, like very specific rules. Like, hey, you have to have a price list, and this has to be on it. It's super specific. Each state has their own rules as well. And all these rules are really antiquated. Like some of the states have rules where like, if you own a funeral home, then you can't own the crematory, right? It's an obvious, 100 years ago, someone lobbied for that. And, those are just rules. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a lot of different laws for each state. Interesting businesses in the funeral space. So obituaries are a really big business, right? Because when someone dies, you put up an obituary. Let's say the funeral home website has an obituary. That gets traffic, right? So what they do is they will try to sell something on that obituary. So it's like, hey, buy flowers, or plant a tree, etc. What's interesting is that the funeral home doesn't really get that much money from it. It's really the website provider that gets money from it. So there's these companies out there that will basically build a free website, and they will use the traffic or the traffic from the obituaries to sell things. The most egregious thing I've seen recently is they will say, hey, plant a tree in my honor, or the loved one's honor, for $30, right? They would take that $30 and then they would take $1 and donate it to some nonprofit organization that plants a tree for $1. And and then that's like $29 in pure profit. And then it might have been $40, I don't know. But then like they make like millions of dollars a year from that. But it's not the funeral home. The funeral home doesn't really get a very big cut. They might get a very, very small percentage of it. So that's an interesting business model. There's also a big business in the recyclable material in your body after you get cremated. So like, let's say you get cremated and you have like gold teeth, or you have like silver in your, or you have some sort of like, knee surgery, you have like a fake knee or something. Like that material is like valuable enough to the point where there's companies out there that they recycle that material and they'll pay the funeral home for those metals. Very interesting. Another fun fact: people die in the winter a lot more than in the summer or spring or fall. I think it's just kind of natural because a lot of people are like closer together. Roughly 1% of people, 1% of the population dies every year. And what's going to be very interesting is because there's so many boomers, like kind of all born in a very similar, like in a short time frame. Like all these people are going to be dying like close to the same time. So I think funeral homes will be real busy coming up in the next 10 years or so. Okay. Another thing about funeral homes, which I definitely don't think is true, is that funeral homes have really bad stigma. It might have been from the past, but everyone feels like funeral homes are ripping them off because, in the past it was really difficult to get pricing, and then like it's very hard to understand the pricing as well because there's all these different things and you don't really know what's going on. You never really planned a funeral before, so it's very difficult, and they get accused of taking advantage of people in time of need. So that's like a stigma they have. I actually don't think it's true at all. And I've never been on the family side of things before, but I've talked to like 2,000 funeral homes personally, and the feeling I get from them is very different. So that's a stigma that's out there. And if I were to generalize like the people that I typically talk to for funeral homes, like your average funeral director is very, very caring. I would say most people get into this business because they care. They genuinely want to help, and it's not really for money. I don't think it's for money at all. I think they generally want to help, and they're all like super nice. A lot of times it's like a family business. I would say your average funeral director is like this 50-year-old white guy, right? But it's usually a family business. So usually it's like a wife and husband team, or it's like someone's like a third or fourth generation with their parents were funeral directors, and then their grandparents were funeral directors. So most of these folks you can imagine are like super not tech savvy. They're typically older, and they really don't like change because they've been doing a certain thing a certain way. So yeah, that's kind of how I would generalize funeral homes. But the one thing I want you to take away from this is like, I would say almost 100% of the people I talk to are super caring, super nice. And I'm glad that when we call into them, like, because we do cold calls, like they're probably the best people to cold call, right? Because they're pretty nice about it. So why are funeral homes so inefficient? The number one reason I think funeral homes are so inefficient is because you're typically dealing with people that are at the age where they need to plan services for their loved ones, right? So typically it's like your spouse or maybe your parents, but like you're typically like 60, 50, 70 when you're at that age. So you haven't really had the customer hasn't really dealt with technology, right? So then funeral homes have never had to change because they are just dealing with this customer that doesn't really understand technology, right? But what's happening now is like the people that are 50 years old now, they actually really do understand technology. And that's why there's like a shift now. But to go back why they're so inefficient is because there hasn't been a lot of demand for change. And, people still use fax machines. Like it's super common. I've seen people use typewriters, which is literally insane. And really trying to change anything because of all the laws they have in place. There's so many rules. Everyone is kind of complacent. The customers are not really demanding it. There hasn't really been anything digital up until like recently because of COVID. So it literally took COVID in order to start having change taking place. And I can see that happening now, where like digital signatures are actually like a normal thing, whereas it's been around for like 20 years. So what else is happening in the industry that's changing that I think is super important is cremation rates are rising. So cremation obviously is when they take your body, they burn it, and they give you ashes back in like an urn, and you don't really need to buy like a plot, right? Because the plot is what's expensive. You have to buy that plot of land. It's super expensive. And cremations in America went from 34% in 2006 to 58% in 2021. And it's going up by a couple percent every year. So it's a pretty dramatic shift. And the reason behind this, I think, is because if you think about like 1920s or whatever, like people kind of just lived where they kind of died where their grandparents died, right? So you live there, you don't really move around that much. You pretty much have a funeral home that you always go to, and so there's like this one family of like funeral homes, funeral directors, like passing on down to generation, and then you have other people like just generation after generation like getting served by them, right? So that's a very loyal population. Well, that's changed now because a lot of people are moving around a lot more. Everyone's moving to the city. There's a lot more transient population. So you're not really loyal to funeral homes, right? And people are in general are less religious, so they're not really like pressured by the religious practices. I think people have less money to spend on funerals now, and I just think in general people don't care less about how their end of life in terms of like what's next. And cremation is becoming more popular because it's cheaper. You don't have to buy a plot. And what's also becoming popular is like a low-cost direct cremation. Basically, all they do is they just cremate your body and give you the ashes back. And that's becoming very popular. It's a much cheaper alternative. It could probably be somewhere between $800 to $1,000 versus like if you're gonna do a service, it might be like $3,000-$4,000 plus the plot plus caskets or whatever. So it could be it's less time consuming for the funeral home, but it's also less margins. Okay, so what do I have after this? Okay, so yes, that's what's happening. So why I think the industry is about to be disrupted is because of this. Is because cremation rates are going up. There's less demand. There's less competition. Or let me say this: there's more competition because people are less loyal. So funeral homes that have been around for a while, it's not as important to people anymore. So before in like the 70s, like someone passes away, funeral would be like, okay, you need X, Y, and Z, and family will just do it. Like pay me $10,000, we'll do this and that for you. So they're kind of reining in the cash. I think now it's a little bit different, where it's a lot more competitive. There's a lot more direct cremation brands that are just going for volume, like lower cost, higher volume, right? So that's a big change that's happening. And then also, like I said earlier, when the person that's dealing with the funeral home now is someone that pretty much grew up with the internet, grew up with technology, they can now say, hey, the fact that I have to come in to get pricing, or the fact that I have to, print stuff out and just scan it back in to get information to you is kind of shitty. And I need a better experience, right? So yeah. So if you were to kind of talk about what Parting Pro does, or my company does, this is not an advertisement, but it kind of flows into what we do. Imagine like a DocuSign / Shopify for funeral homes. So the family can just do everything online. It's a super seamless process. And it's really focused on user experience. So it's super easy for them to use. And we're actually the #1 processor in at-need online arrangements in the country. So basically be able to pay online and just do everything online. Before us, it wasn't really done. Like, it was like a crazy idea. Think about this. It was a crazy idea 5 years ago for someone to go online and pay, right? And just do everything online. Which is obviously not crazy because people have been doing stuff online and buying stuff online for like 20, 30 years now. But funeral homes are just so late in the game that this was like a crazy idea. So what we've done is we just built like a beautiful process so everyone can do everything online. It's super easy. So, all right, cool. Hope that helps. Just random facts about funeral homes. Yeah, thanks for the idea. Hopefully this video is somewhat entertaining and educational. And I have some other ideas for other videos I might make. But yeah, actually, if you have ideas, let me know. But I think I'm going to try to expand from just Tesla puts. And try to go into other stuff. But I think probably one thing that I could talk a lot about is sales. So I might consider making some videos on that, or how to start a company. I don't know. Yeah. Cool, man. Thank you for watching, and talk to you soon. Bye.